couple of examples of how you might use a for loop inside some images. So I've just started with my setup and draw here. And what I'm going to do is this first one is going to be just a static image. And I'm going to have for int is I is less than the width, I plus plus. So I am creating a for loop that I'm going to count through every, so I'm going to start from 0. I'm going to go to the width of the screen. So in this case, that's 600. I've set that in the line above, just here, my width. And I'm going to increase by 1 each time. So I've missed a semicolon. This is going to be basically something that looks a little bit like a barcode. So I'm going to draw a series of vertical lines, one for each pixel wide, and then I'm going to color them a random shade of grey so that we can get a kind of nice line background which will randomize every time we start. So the first thing I want to do is if I set, well, I'll run it right now, what's going to happen is that for loop is running 0 to less than width, so 0 to 599, 600 times, but it's not doing anything because I've not got anything inside that loop. So what I'm going to put inside that loop is to draw a line from position I. So remember, on the first time around, that's going to be 0. So 0 along and 0 height. 2, I need to use I again so that it's a vertical line to the height of the screen. And so what this will do is it will create me a line that moves along by 1 space every time I increases by 1. So it's just drawn it black now, and the reason it's drawn it black is because the default color for a stroke is black. So if I change the stroke color, let's make it red, what's going to happen? I think the whole screen is going to go red because it's going to draw 600 vertical lines that are red. Bingo. So if I now set the stroke color to be a random value from 0 to 255, now remember I can either write from 0, 255, but if I miss out the 0, it assumes that it starts at 0. So what I have now is an error expecting a right parenthesis. Yep, it's there. And so we have this kind of interesting barcode type style. So if I repeat that, what you should see is it changes slightly every time. And so if you really want to play around with this, you can set the stroke to be a random value between 0 and 1. And then you can use that value to determine whether or not you draw it as red or not red or black, white or black. So it's a purely black and white barcode. You can set it so that the stroke width will randomly change. And if the stroke width randomly changes, you have to then consider adding up all those stroke widths and getting to the end of the width, or you can just let it run on. We can set entirely random colors for all 3 sections of color. And so it just starts getting a bit more interesting. So that is the example that you need for the barcode. So if I just save that, save it in there as barcode. And then the other example I want to give you is kind of a sky, like a night sky, where I draw lots of points that would represent stars. So if I set the background, now I want the background to be a nice navy blue color. So let's see if we can find a nice kind of like dark blue color. That'll do. Of course it disappears. 423680. 423680. And I'll run that just to check that I've got kind of a nice color. Yeah, it's a bit purpley on my screen, but it'll do. Now, what I want to do is I want to set the stroke color to be white, because that's what I'm going to use for my point, because remember it's just basically 1 pixel of a line. And then I'm going to decide how many stars I want. So let's just say I is less than 10. Obviously that's not what we're going to need, but it'll do for now. It's got the for loop set up. The other thing I want to do is, just to make it visible that we can see these right now, I'm going to set the stroke width to be quite large, just so that it's visible for us. As we add more stars, we'll reduce that and kind of get to a nice look on the screen. So point takes in 2 values, an x, y position. So my x position is going to be a random value between 0 and the width, and my y position is going to be a random value between 0 and height. And so if I run that, what I do end up with is these kind of 10 points. Now I said we might reduce that width, so if I change that stroke weight to 1, those stars are now very small. You can see if I just move the mouse to let you see them. Obviously 10 isn't a lot, so let's just randomly try 100 and see. Okay, so now that's looking a bit better. Maybe I want to make it 200. So now I've got this really nice kind of starlight background. I've got some weight, which is 1. I can make it smaller or bigger. And I'm starting at 0. I'm counting all the way up while I is less than 200, so from 0 to 199. And I'm increasing by 1 each time. Now what I could do is I could start to draw a house, for example, in front of that. So if I just show you how that might work, I want to set the fill to be 0, so it's going to be black. And I'll set a rectangle from, what are we, 600 tall? So let's go 500 tall, 100 wide. No, sorry. I've just missed the first parameter, haven't I? We're going to go 100 along, 500 down as my start position. And it's going to be, let's say, 300 wide and 100 tall, so that it's going to hit the bottom of the screen. And that will give me, well, maybe not quite. My stroke color is there, so I need to set the stroke to be 0, and now I have a nice silhouette. So what you could start to do is I could start to make that almost like a skyscraper. If I changed the orientation of the rectangle, I could put yellow circles in it and so on. But the one thing I'm interested to see what happens if we bump that content into the draw function. Oh, so all the stars are just taking over the screen, right? So let's think about it. We've started the draw function. We've started a for loop which draws 200 stars. We draw the rectangle on top of that, and then we go back to the beginning and we draw another 200 stars. So the best way that we can, with layering, is after every time draw loop starts, we want to start with a blank screen again. So the way we do that is we pop the background at the very top, and so every time it starts the draw function, it draws a background, then draws stars on top, then draws our building. So what we end up with is a crazy amount of kind of star twinkling going on. So we can play around with frame rate, we can play around with different things to reduce that value. So that's kind of the first example of the barcodes, perhaps a bit more abstract. And then this one is something that maybe you can implement in some images that you create.